Okay, so east of Nath, or Nath, Nath, whatever, a long chain of islands, the festering sore of the summer sea. They are inhabited by pirates, slavers, sellswords, murderers, and monsters, and the worst of humanity. They gather from every land. Life is nasty, brutally hot, and short. The islands teem with bloodflies and worms, making living conditions very unhealthy. Ruined cities there hint at some former civilization from the Dawn Age, but nothing remains of it.
Pirates of the Caribbean land. That's what I think.
Yeah. I thought of historical comparisons with the island of Sicily and Sardinia, where it was the property that was the source of conflict between two great empires like Rome and Carthage. In this case, it was Old Gis and Valyrians. They fought over ownership of, I think, the Isle of Tears.
That's true,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think that was Sextus, because I know Sextus was a pirate that like kept showing up and was a thorn in the Roman sides for many years. I think it was Pompey that actually finally got rid of him. But there was like a little pirate empire thing going on there for a while.
Yeah,
But during the Civil War, when Rome was having its civil wars, it kind of took over control because there was no one there to keep them in check.
yeah. The Isle of Tears was founded by Old Gis, I think, and it's a wind-beaten rocky land until it was captured by Valeria, and the Valerians sent their worst criminals to live there in hard labor, and it became known as an evil place where torturers honed their craft and blood sorcerers mated women to beasts to create half-human monsters. And
pretty much what Australia is
Augustine
like now,
has helpfully compared it to Australia.
I was waiting for somebody to. How do you get that far?
Yeah.
I mean, that sounds like Australian history to me.
Yeah, it's the closest we get.
How come that Australia became that nice after that?
Honing our crafts with torture.
Is that where drop bears come from?
Yeah, drop bears. That's our chief weapon of war.
So speaking of, we got a couple of native Australians on board this podcast right now. As native Australians, do you guys see any remnants of former colony that you guys were, like anything like that remains
Australia?
In Australian culture?
I don't think so. I mean, most Australians come from immigrants, and even I guess most of the population came during the gold rush during the 1850s, long after the colonization and all that. So I don't know how much convict blood is left.
You guys don't walk around holding shivs or anything like that?
Oh, well, we do, yeah, but this has nothing to do with colonization.
It's Australia. Everyone's trying to kill you.
Yeah, every animal, everything.
So there's a bit of Sotheros, actually.
Crocodiles waiting in your bathroom.
I saw this documentary about Australia called Wolf Creek. Pretty scary.
It's a romantic comedy.
Now, once upon a time, one of these cities on the Basilisk Isles used to be called the 10th Free City, right? So it's pretty successful. So that makes me think, at least on the Isle of Tears, this could potentially be very fertile land. And again, this makes me sort of just question, look, if this is a whole area that's just flooded with pirates and jackasses and anarchy and whatever corsairs, if there were ever an area where even the Iron Islanders would be welcome to take over and bring some order to, this would be it. So it's I don't know why this isn't. If I was an island, I'd be like, look, man, not only would we be taking over a bunch of new land and a bunch of stuff, we'd basically be doing the world a favor because this whole area needs a bit of order,
Yeah, but it's so horrible to live there. It sounds like just torture, like the rejects of society. Even as bad as the Iron Islands are and as lacking in resources.
Hot, humid, swarming with stinging flies, sand fleas, bloodworms. I think the Iron Islanders are happy with their own crappy islands, and they don't need new, even worse islands.
It would be a downgrade, yeah. And they're they're sort of protected in the Iron Islands. Well, I guess there's the commonality between the two is that the land is so worthless that nobody bothers to attack it.
Yeah.
And when they do, the people, they're not really tied to the land in any significant way. It's basically just a sort of headquarters. So if they hear about an attack coming, they can just disperse and the attackers will find empty land and they won't have anything to do. So they'll just go home.
Well, that's the thing is that I'm not so sure it's quite as worthless as, say, the Iron Islanders, where they just don't really have a lot of green fields and fertile soil to grow crops and stuff. I think they actually do here. In this case, it's just the sociology of all these criminals everywhere. It's hard to establish, peace. But if you bring a giant military force there that no one can mess with, you would think that you can bring some order to that area and some value to the land.
I think you can, but then it's sort of it lasts a few years, and then eventually you take your military force away, and it turns back into pirate land.
Or they become the pirates themselves.
Spooky voodoo shit going down here which is the Isle of Toads.
Mm.
So, like, I think there's a general dark magic brooding all over these islands that makes the plagues, that makes the blood flies, and makes it unpleasant in general.
Yeah, well, it has a very bloody, horrible history. I think so. After the fall of Valeria, it sort of thrived during the Century of Blood, a lot like the Dothraki. It became rich and powerful off the misery of others. Some called her the 10th free city, as Augustine said. It is believed the stench of corruption reached the gods, and they sent a red plague upon the island. 9 out of every 10 men died screaming, their skin falling off, bleeding everywhere. And it was shunned for a century until a Carthene pirate raised his banner there and made the Brotherhood of Bones. They were perfectly placed to prey upon other passing ships, and it became home to corsairs from everywhere.
There was a mention of like these fish people that had webbed hands and feet, and I was just wondering if this is where all the Crannog men came from.
Well, no, not the Crannog men. The 3 sisters, yeah. Yeah,
right. That's what I meant.
The Isle of Toad, we find another greasy black idol of a gigantic toad, more fish people. The people have fish-like faces and are believed to be descendants of possibly the Deep Ones. And it sounds like their physiology is similar to the people on the 3 sisters, so maybe there's a link there.
Yeah, I think someone has to draw on the map all the oily
3 sisters.
Yeah, aren't they described as having webbed hands?
I don't think so.
Yeah, when
the
Davos
sistermen
is being
have only the nobility, though.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
All the women have webbed hands.
I don't know if I don't think the Crannog men do they?
Well, I think the Crannog men were the stereotype is that they had gills and stuff like that, like frogs, right? And they had webbed feet. They're frog eaters, so they were kind of very frog-ish.
Oh.
I thought I remembered that they had webbed feet too, or webbed hands. Well, that was a stereotype anyway.
But they're supposed to be like connected to the Children of Force, right?
Maybe, yeah.
So maybe it's just a racial slur. Like
it could, it could just be the phrase, like making.
The phrase hate them. They really hate them.
We're trusting the phrase here. Come on.
Phrase made it with weasels.
One thing that stuck out to me from this section was the fact that the Volantine Navy was the primary aggressor in this area that was trying to bring order, and so it just made me think of the fact that that Volantis actually has a navy. So I think in the last episode we talked about Bravos being the primary navy of Essos and Volantis being the primary army, but it sounds like Volantis also has a pretty formidable navy as well.
They do, and it's heading for
they're sending
Marine at the moment.
Right.
300 ships or something.
Although,
so it makes you think Bravos must have
full
something
of
even
slaves, though.
better.
So.
Did Victorian take a couple of them? I can't remember which. He stole a bunch of ships.
Not of the Volantine. He would take some Giscari and anything he found in the Gulf of Grief.
Right. Okay. Yep.
Yeah, he's ahead of the Volantis fleet at the moment.
I would think the Volantines too would probably hire a fair amount of cell sails, like to go clean out the Basilisk Isles. That just seems more like their style is hiring cell sails and saying, "Hey, you go take this off, Sathos San. You'll do a good job, I'm sure." Here's a bunch of gold.
I like some of Yandel's imagery, though. He describes the towns that live there like toadstools. They're just sort of abandoned on a dime, and they sink into the mud. And like the assemblage there is not really based on any kind of geography or society. It's just this kind of philosophy. This is the place where we assemble, so we can disperse and retake it at any time. So it's almost impossible to conquer from an outside force. There's a place called Talon, which has a honeycomb of caves where the slaves are held until they're sold. So I guess there is a bit of order, a bit of economic order there.
Yeah, that was one of my favorite little details of the World of Ice and Fire was that Sathos San, Solidor's ancestor, presumably was the turncoat who made himself king of the Basilisk Isles instead of chasing them out. I was like,
maybe that's foreshadowing a future event in the story where maybe Salidor and Davos will maybe start their own kingdom down there.
Oh yeah, that'd be cool.
After Davos is done being Azor High.
Yeah, that's the after Song of Ice and Fire Adventures, the sequel series.
Yeah, you get the roll credits, and then 10 years later, Davos
Seaworth will return in King of the Basilisk Isles.
Now, it sounds like here in the Basilisk Isles, this is where the Karth Navy also has history of trying to raid and even establish a territory. It just seems like there's a lot of navies in play here. We have the Volantine Navy, we have the Navy from Karth, we have the Navy from the Summer Islands theoretically in play, Navy from the Iron Islanders, stuff like that. I'm curious why there isn't much more interaction between them, because it sounds like this is an area thick with naval forces from various different cultures.
Well, I'm sure there is a lot of interaction. They're just savaging each other. It's
Valeria went down.
It's sort of comparable to the Stepstones in a way, this sort of axis of trade and ship movement that gets seized by pirates as a source of income, yeah.
Do you guys have a Navy power ranking in your head that's going on right now? Because it's going on in my head.
Probably Bravos first. Then
yeah, Bravos has got to be number one.
Iron Islands is up there.
They only have long ships. Like the crew is good, but they're only little piddly ships.
They're good at pillaging. I don't know how good they would be in like full-on naval combat.
Yeah,
they lost
that'd be
status, obviously.
It'd be an interesting fight to see them against like a Bravosi galley, and whether the Bravosi could ram them or if they could, outmaneuver it and then.
Or you throw in some Summer Island galleons in there too, or maybe some of the galleons from Karth and see what happens. I'd be curious to see which one was. I'd agree with Bravosi being number one, but I think the Iron Islanders might be a close two, depending on what's going on with these other SOCs.
We haven't really seen a lot of sort of at sea combat, have we? Like, I guess there was a bit in A Feast for Crows where that Iron Island attacks that Summer Island.
Every time someone's on a boat, they fall in the water and they pass out, and then it's 9 chapters until we get them again.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, he doesn't like battles in particular.
Yeah.
I mean, Patrick, in the European age of the longboat, when Vikings dominated the oceans, there really wasn't an equivalent rival navy at the time. They were really the only game in town, right?
Yeah, you sort of, but you have to remember that the reason why that was mainly because the Roman Empire was on a decline, and you have the Byzantine Empire, but they had a much larger land force than anything else, so there wasn't really anyone to contend with them, but not so much because they were not technologically equal to them, more that they just didn't have the power to do anything against it. Okay. And I would personally say that Bravosi is the best ones. Volantine fleet would probably have the best after that. If you say the Crown, how much they could muster, maybe as a whole, they would be the third.
Well,
or
the Crown
just the red one.
Doesn't have its own. Oh, they have a small navy, but they get red.
No, not itself, but they could call on their vassals.
They could muster the Dragonstone Navy and the Old Town Navy and the
red ones. Red ones are the big.
And the Red Wine Navy.
Yeah. So that would be the
Lannister
third
Navy. Yeah.
I would definitely say that actually maybe the Ironborns would be like 4th or 5th on the list, at least for me.
A unified 7 kingdoms would presumably also be able to call on the Ironborn, so maybe 7 kingdoms. Right. Not at this point, but in its strength, during the Targaryen reign, maybe.
But you take that Bravosi Navy, and then you combine that with like the Summer Island swan ships, and the Volantine Navy and the Karth Navy. That's a formidable navy right there too. If they all united.
Yeah, if you could set it up so that the Summer Islanders could protect them from afar, they
would pretty much be invulnerable.
If I were them, I'd start shooting fire arrows with those golden heart bows, and I don't think you'd want to mess with that.
Well, I guess dragons makes it all a bit of a moot point, as we see during the dance. Just burn everything.
Yeah, the best navy is dragons.
Although I guess it is possible to bring them down. I think one Bravosi sellsword brings down a dragon during the dance, but it's hard. Yeah. Okay.
9 separate Bravosi sellswords say they.
Yeah, that's true. A lot of different accounts. The only other point I had was we hear a bit about a dark god that they apparently worship, and they worship him by festooning the skulls of their enemies onto a ship and offering it up to the dark god on Skull Island. Which is kind of cool. But any other points on the Basilisk Isles?
Did someone want to talk about the Horgash Island?
I think you do.
No, I'm not the one who wrote that on the outline.
Oh, that was me.
All right.
Yeah, Horgash. Do you lie awake at night fearing this pirate town?
Yeah, Sty, Horgash, Black Pudding, and other pirate lairs, each viler and more infamous than the last.
Black Pudding. Black Pudding sounds
who
the
got
worst.
The short end of the stick there?
Black Pudding sounds the worst because it sounds so non-threatening.
Well, you picture 3 pirates like, I'm from Horgash, I'm from Stir, I'm from Black Pudding. It doesn't strike.
And they edge away at horror. Oh God! Away with you, demon.
Arr, Black Pudding. The worst place.
My head Horgash is named after all the crabs that live there.
And we're there.
So much for keeping it classy and hilarious, like Amber Rocks asked for.